Welcome to another episode of Running with the Pack. I'm Paul Bishop, and I am the acquisitions editor for Wolfpack Publishing. And with me today are two good friends of mine, Allan Clemons, who has been named a Grandmaster of the Mystery Writers of America, is a three-time winner of the Seamus Award from the Private Eye Writers of America, as well as other accolades from them. He wrote the graphic novel that became the movie, Oscar-winning movie, The Road to Perdition with Tom Hanks, and his series of Quarry, a Hitman, became a streaming series for Cinemax. Matt Clemons is a writer and teacher and researcher. He has written over 30 novels or co-written over 30 novels with Allan Clemons, including the John Sand series of spy novels, which we're here to talk about today, which began with Come Spy With Me, and the recently released Live Fast, Spy Hard. More on the way. Greetings, guys. Thanks for being here.
Hi. It looks like Matthew is off researching one of our exotic locations.
We try to make the books global, so we go to paradise when we can.
Yeah, I can see that on your tax returns.
Yeah, well,
I have the evidence. Here it is on film.
Max has always told me his one goal was to take a non-deductible vacation.
That's true. We were in Nassau researching, where the murder houses were. We were in Hawaii researching where the murder house was, till finally my wife said to me, "Can we take a vacation when we're not looking for the murder house?"
And you said, "No, honey, this is the way it's going to be," right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Deductible is good. Deductible is good. But I was not looking for a house, by the way, to commit a murder in. I was doing historical research into houses where murders had occurred.
We should start a tour company. We've been to far too many murder houses.
That's right. That's right.
So have I, but there have been warm corpses at the ones that I go to.
We try to avoid that.
Yeah, we got the real deal here, Matthew.
Yeah, that's true.
And I should say, if you look in some of my books, you will see this fellow Bishop mentioned as having given me some actual research information.
Some small advice.
Yes, yes.
Now, you guys have been fans of so many different genres over the years. You write thrillers, you write TV tie-ins, you write movie tie-ins, you write hitman stories, you write Mickey Spillane novels, Max does, because of your connection with the Spillane estate. You guys are producers of just an amazing amount of material, but I can't really place when you've done an espionage novel like the John Sand series before. Am I missing something?
Matthew, can you think of something where we've done that before?
Nope, no spies. No. The Man from Uncle tie-in was way too soon for us, so I can't think of a single spy novel we've gotten to do.
We did do 3 political novels that kind of fall into that area. We did Supreme Justice, Executive Order, and the middle one was Fate of the Union.
Fate of the Union. Yeah.
That's the Reader and Rogers series, and that kind of gets into that area.
But we're not talking about the spy era that we all love, that James Bond spy era from the early Bond books, from the Fleming books, that period you guys haven't written in before. And really, it's that love of that you guys are bringing to the John Sand books.
Well, ironically, John Sand was one of the first things we wrote together. I think you may recall this, Paul.
Started as a short story?
Yeah, years ago, many years ago now. How long ago, Matthew?
A great many. I'm looking at the cover of the. This is one of the dummy covers. I don't know if people can see that. No, not really.
Yep, we're getting lost.
But it was 2000. And not very much. We started CSI in 2000, and it came out, I think, the first book in 2001. It had to have been not long after that.
Or even before. Might have even been before.
Right, it had to have been right about that time.
And what we're talking about is we were approached by a company that had this idea. I think there may have been, it may have been related to a Christian publishing company who were trying to branch out a little bit, and they wanted, and we weren't the only authors who were approached about this, to do soft-core sex novels about married couples. Now, I tried to explain to them that married couples don't need to fantasize about having sex together unless the marriage isn't going well. But within the context of what they wanted to do, they wanted wanted each book to be about a married couple, and there'd be a certain sexual content to it, erotic content to it.
Sounds like a strange branch for a Christian publishing to go down.
Well, for erotic, it is like exactly the antithesis of what you're trying to do. It's like, here, fantasize about your wife. Wait, do you guys not get how porn works? But it was,
don't seem to.
but it was,
the good
they were
news
paying
was,
$1 a word back
Wow.
then.
Oh.
We were making like a dime a word everywhere else in the world.
I mean, even $1 a word is great today.
Oh yeah.
Well, it was $1 a word back then for short stories where we were allowed to write up to 5,000 words. So
Before we go on though with how Sand got started, how did you two guys get started?
Well, Matthew was actually a student of mine at the Mississippi Valley Writers Conference, which is a writers conference I taught at starting in the early 70s, and I was there for, I think, 25 years.
you were a long time. You were there a long time.
And Matthew was someone who began as a student, evolved into a teacher. He was working with a writer named Carl Largent, who wrote a lot of very good Tom Clancy-esque thrillers. And you were his researcher, occasionally kind of a co-writer, I think, on some of them.
And we taught together eventually at Mississippi Valley too. But Max and I had met as I was a fan of his band, and I met him and Terry Beatty signing comic books at a band gig in like 1984.
Wow.
The first time we met at the Writers Conference was 1987, when I decided that I needed to get back to the one thing in life that I really loved, which was writing. And I knew, the one thing I knew was just because I read a book didn't mean I could write a book. And so I wanted somebody to teach me who knew what they were doing. And I was already a big fan of Max's fiction.
Well, it
So
seems
he
like it
seemed-
was a
finding a place that close to my house where he was teaching was a nice lead in.
So it's really a match made in heaven, though, because it's continued on for so many years and has been so successful. I mean, that's a wonderful thing. But it's interesting that the John Sand books that we have today started almost virtually as your first project together.
Well,
Yeah.
our first project together, I mean, to really bring this full circle, was there was a book being published about mystery writers and crime writers, and I got assigned to do an essay on Mickey Spillane. And then they called and said, would you also do Ian Fleming? And I didn't really have time to do both. So I contacted Matthew and said, would you write a rough draft for me of, about Ian Fleming, about his life and career? And of course, Matt was a big fan of Fleming's, as I was. And so what you wrote together was a
what you're saying is Matt went over to Wikipedia, copied that out, and sent it to you. Is that?
God, I wish I could have done that.
Wikipedia.
This was so long ago, I had to read a real book.
Oh, that's funny.
And what happened with John Sand was why we took that strange gig to write porn about married couples for married couples, an exceedingly small audience, I would imagine, was that the good part was we could do whatever we wanted to in terms of genre. And we immediately went to, wow, now we can do something, we can do James Bond. He just has to be married James Bond. We also created for them a version of The Thin Man, which became we didn't call it The Thin Man, much as we don't call John Sand James Bond, but and that was published as a short story. And we did 2 short stories for them and we had a contract to do a John Sand novel, and we had begun what became Come Spy With Me. And what happened was, when this company Wolfpack and I started talking, the editor there wanted something in a hurry. And
Yes,
I talked to Matt and said, what can we do good but fast? And he said, well, I was looking through some stuff and I found this John Sand book that we had written a third of. And so we basically finished it, is what we did.
And the thing is that concept that this Christian publishing company branched off into about married couples really makes the John Sand novels different, because it is, as we say, a marriage license to kill. And it is about a married couple of spies. And that changes the dynamics and makes it different to anything else that's out there.
Well, I think so. And, you have many sort of couplings in fiction. You've got, Mulder and Scully and so on. In this area, Mrs. Peel and
John
Steed, but they never marry, or they marry very late in the game. And
in
really
the Jump the Shark episode.
Yeah, the premise of this was, what if, at the end of On Her Majesty's Secret Service, when James Bond marries, she wasn't killed. What would have happened then? And that really was, I mean, I don't have to tell you two guys that the whole thing about fiction writing is answering the question, what if? It's all about what if.
Absolutely. So Matt, what did you see in this that made you want to come back to this particular story?
A dollar sign concept. A dollar sign.
A dollar sign.
The dollar sign never hurts. But when we were gathering stories for Myrtleized, it was one of the things that popped was not just the 2 John Sand short stories, but I basically tripped over the 5 chapters that were essentially the first 5 chapters of Come Spy With Me. And we were talking on the phone frequently as we put together the collection that became Myrtleized.
Also published by Wolfpack.
I said, oh, by the way, these 5 chapters don't suck. We should probably maybe think about what we would like to do with that. We've got a lot of different things that we've started and stopped over the years. Or we did a short story with the idea it would be a novel and nobody got excited about it. But this was a book we'd had a contract to do, and 5 chapters in, the publisher calls to tell us they're bankrupt because they've been paying $1 a word for short stories. And so it sat for 20 years, and basically I think we had both sort of forgotten about it. And then when we tripped over it, it was like, this is John Kennedy and the assassination of Trujillo and these married spies. And not to be immodest, but we're pretty decent at what we do. And I thought it was good. And I just said, is there somebody that would be interested in this? And Max said, I'll see.
And I was.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, and I was quite frankly, Wolfpack, while Wolfpack right now is expanding into different areas, the core of Wolfpack, as it began at least, was action, adventure, Westerns, men's, a certain kind of men's pulp in the best sense of the word. And this, being able to do a James Bond style espionage novel, I mean, we're not doing Jean Le Carré here. I mean, we're not even doing Len Dayton. I mean, we are,
action.
We're doing that core thing that happened when I was a kid and when Matt was a baby, basically, where you had the Man from U.N.C.L.E. out there and you had all the spy stuff.
Derek Flint, all of those guys.
And we wanted to do something like that. The very first thing, I don't know if you know this, Paul, but I wrote a James Bond style spy novel when I was in high school.
Really?
It did not sell, but I wrote
But
it.
you wrote it.
I wrote it.
One of the things I love about this series, the whole married spy concept. So many of Wolfpack readers are women who love these stories. They read a lot of our Westerns. They're a very strong part of our audience and a part of our pack. And I think that the marriage spies concept really can appeal to them as well as the action junkies. I think this is something that appeals across that wide audience of demographics.
I think so. I think it's important to speak to not just a narrow slice of that audience. The reading audience is overall is not as large as we'd like it to be. People are not as literate as they once were. So, you know, the idea of, well, I'm going to write a boy book, I don't know if that's a good idea anymore. I think it needs to be something anybody would want to read. Now, it's tricky for us because, I mean, we in Live Fast, Spy Hard, not to give anything away, he doesn't necessarily remain faithful to her at one point in the story. And that's interesting. How do we do that and have us not suddenly hate our hero? And that's the kind of thing that Matt and I talk about, tiptoe around and really discuss about, are we going to go there? Are we going to go there with that? And how real kind of are we going to make this marriage?
And we didn't want to go there.
Let me assure readers that it all works out.
Oh, it all works out.
But we didn't want to go there originally, except that that's where the story went.
That's true.
And you have to be faithful to the story. And so we did that, but it also has impacted the book we're working on now, in that we have a different dynamic because there are now more people involved in the relationship, almost, because Charlotte is still there. And
the interesting thing with this series is you guys really plotted it out as a 3-book series, because that's what we talked about contractually. But I know that as you've written on, there are other ideas that you can see the stories branching into. And this could become a much longer running series, given the opportunity and the sales and the interest.
Yeah, we need people to buy them and read them and love them, and then we will feed that hungry need that
hopefully
will develop.
You talk about going where the story takes you. I often get phone calls from authors who are they're a little bit worried about where their story's going. Is it going to be what I'm expecting as their editor? It's going in a different direction. And I always tell them, follow the story. You know, in police work, we always follow the money, right? That's the key to so much stuff. As a writer and as an editor and a publisher, it's follow the story. Tell the story that's supposed to be told. Don't try to force it into some other area that it doesn't want to go, because you're going to miss something and it's not going to be as organic.
Well, plus your brain's a liar. Your brain will lie to you, but your gut will always tell you the truth. So if your gut says this is where the story goes, that's where you have to go. But I learned a long time ago, my brain doesn't like me, and it will lie to me and tell me you need to be over here. And it's just, you have to follow the story.
I always find that when I'm struggling with a story, it's because I'm trying to force the characters to do something they don't want to do.
Yeah.
Right.
And until I listen to them and I go back and say, okay, I can give up this 5,000 words and go back and do this right. And then it starts to flow, because it's this strange concept. It's, of the characters really telling you what to do. It's part of your subconscious that's taking you that way, clearly.
Well, I sold my first book 50 years ago this year.
Congratulations.
Wow. I have been doing this for 50 years. And in order to do this with some success, I've had to learn some things. Now, what you learn as a writer are your rules and your way of doing it. There isn't one way. I mean, what computer I use won't make you a writer. People are always asking me these irrelevant questions. What time of day do you write? How many days a week do you write? That's all irrelevant. But But one of the things that I've learned is that I need a very specific kind of outline or synopsis. And that is, it has to be detailed enough that I know where I'm going and what the stops are along the way that look like I'm going to encounter. And if it's a whodunit, I need to know who did it and why. I have to know that going in. Beyond that, though, I view it as a roadmap where if I'm on that highway and I see that sign that says world's biggest ball of string, I'm taking a left and I'm checking that big ball of string out. So you cannot be confined to that, to that outline. And again, the other thing, and this is what Matt is talking about, is if you're writing characters well, at a certain point, the characters will stand up on their hind legs and say, this is who I am, this is what I'm about, and this is where we're going next. Do you want to come along for the ride, or do you want to screw this thing up? And that happens all the time. It happens to Matt and me all the time.
When I start, I usually like to have an ending in mind, and then 2 or 3 scenes that I know are going to appear somewhere in the book. And then I get very clinical about it. Okay, I want this many words. I want to do it this many chapters because I want this type of speed with the book.
Right.
And then I kind of fill stuff in. But what is always good, as far as I'm concerned, is as I'm writing along and I'm heading towards that goal, that final climactic scene that I've already set, the unveiling of the killer, I know who the killer is. And then you go, oh, no, that's not the killer.
That's happened to me too.
The killer. And really what that does is you've taken your readers down where you're expecting them to go. And now you're taking that left turn. And that's what makes a story special, because you've now peeled the onion away enough that you can see all aspects of this. But you can't do that until you start the writing process.
Right. Right. I did with one of the Quarries, the Quarry novels. I knew that I was heading toward a conflict between Quarry and a woman that he really cared about. And I knew that's where it headed, but I didn't know what he was going to do. I knew the last chapter would have to be a corker. And I was convinced that by the time I got there, something really interesting would happen. Is he going to kill her? Is he not going to kill her? Is she going to let him go? And
what are the consequences of both?
Right. And by having the structure of this is where we're headed, I didn't have to know precisely what we were going to do when we got there. Like
now,
any good journey, you want to discover things.
Matthew, I know Al well enough that his background in The Man from U.N.C.L.E. and Secret Agent and all of those shows back in the day are both, true loves for he and I. In fact, right up behind me here is my Man from U.N.C.L.E. book collection, which is the one thing I really kept from that time period. Was your influence the same?
I have 1 through 18 of the book collection. All the comic books. My little corgi James Bond Aston Martin still sits on my desk.
Mine's around here somewhere. It's up there. Yeah.
I've lost the little guy that flew out the roof, but everything else is still there. I was allowed at a very young age by my parents to go to movies I probably should not have gone to.
So I have to show off.
That particular car, yes, is in my office as well. That guy, and that guy's gone. I need him. But yeah, and I have the Man from U.N.C.L.E. box set because I watched every single episode of that show live when that was on.
What's interesting to me is
we were all in the same place.
That's a show that I've had to allow to live in my imagination. It played such a huge part in my younger years. In fact, part of becoming an LAPD detective was because of the Man from U.N.C.L.E. I was 8 years old and my parents asked me, what did you want to be? And I said, I want to be a policeman. And I never grew out of it, but that was because of the Man from U.N.C.L.E. However, some shows hold up, but some of those U.N.C.L.E. shows technologically, story-wise, they're just not the gems that I remember in my imagination. And I'd rather have them be there in my imagination.
Yeah, I'm a different audience than I was then. But that's okay. They were what we needed them to be then.
Yeah.
And that's enough.
I mean,
I
something
had the
like the
same-
Wild Wild West holds up. Even Mission
Yeah, which is
Impossible
odd,
holds
but
up.
it really does.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting. The shows that hold up and don't hold up, and I had the same problem with. I have the, the suitcase. Do you have the suitcase with all the
Uncle stuff.
episodes in it? And I really didn't make it very far into the second season. I got very disappointed. And I remember watching one episode and thinking, this is one of the worst written episodes of any TV show I've ever seen. And then at the end, it said it was written by Robert Towne. And he's the guy who wrote Chinatown, for Pete's sake.
Yeah,
And I thought, well, if
but
Robert
Robert
Towne
was
can't
6
write
when
a
he
good
wrote
Man
that.
from Uncle episode, I better bail at this point.
We all write bad things before we write good things.
it's true.
That's for sure. But we had we have extremely nice reviews for the new book on Amazon, but there was one negative one that complained about that we seem to be going down, the not the realistic spy espionage route, but the because we have an agency called Guile. And this guy says, "Oh, I'm afraid they're going to start writing the guy from Guile." And I thought,
Okay.
we're
I
not
mean,
quite on the same page here, are we?
No, that guy's totally missing the point of the books. This is not, realistic. This is escapism, pure escapism.
Yeah.
We
And
did not set out to write a documentary. We set out to write popcorn, and really good popcorn.
that's what I want to read, gourmet popcorn.
Yeah.
And that's what we're turning out here. And I think that anybody who loves action adventure, anybody who has a connection back to those days, or even just to the James Bond movies, even the current ones, that type of feel is what comes through in these books. It's a cloak that they wear.
Do we
Yes,
have to
and-
send that guy a buck if we call him the guy from Guile books from now on? I kind of like that.
Oh,
Well, he'll be guileless.
Well, I
Oh,
will say,
God.
I will say this. I mean, to me, my major inspiration here are the original Bond novels and the Connery Bond movies. Pretty much, period. I mean, that's because I think you know this, Paul. I think I wrote about this at the end of the first book. Come
Yes,
Spy
you
with Me.
rated the Bond films.
Right. I was reading Mickey Spillane. I ran out of Mickey Spillane books, and in the 8th grade, started reading Ian Fleming, James
Explains a
Bond.
lot.
And then I had gone through pretty much all of those books that were published to that point, and the Dr. No movie came out. I didn't even know it was going to come out. And I got my parents to drive me 35 miles on a school night the day that movie opened. And to this day, Connery saying Bond, James Bond, is the moment in film that
Has
transcends
stayed with you.
everything else. So I was a Bond fan, a Fleming fan, before Dr. No. And then Dr. No just, took it to the sky. And I watched all my friends. People remember Beatlemania, but
Oh, Bond Mania.
Bond Mania, everybody in my school, every boy in my school, we carried briefcases to school because of the briefcase in From Russia with Love.
One of the things about those early films, the line Bond, James Bond, they were sophisticated quips as opposed to the double entendres that they turned out to be. I mean, the line from Goldfinger, "Do you expect me to talk? No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die." What a great line for that particular part of the movie. And I think
Absolutely.
that gets lost somewhere in the later films.
Well,
But that was the line for me where everything went wild, because I was just enough younger than Max that it was Goldfinger for me that set me on that path. I was probably 8 or 9 at that point.
And they were making movies for people to watch. There wasn't a lot of considerations there. The thing with the latest Bond films is they've been asked not to use the double entendres anymore because they don't translate well into Chinese. And there's a lot of Chinese money behind the Bond films now. So we've lost something due to commercialism. And I think that John Sand gives us so much of that back.
Well,
That's certainly our goal.
The other thing is that going back to Fleming and going back to Connery Bond, particularly through, say, You Only Live Twice, is the toughness. In Dr. No, when he says, you probably remember whatever gun it was, but this shoots 6, that shoots 6 bullets, and you've had your 6, and he shoots the guy when he's unarmed. That's incredibly tough. That's Mike Hammer tough. And I think we do that level of tough in Sand. I want to do that kind of hard-boiled noir, really,
Yes.
element that has been lost in those. It was certainly lost in the Roger Moore years. And we do that. And then there's also another element which comes from the other part of my career where I do the historical stuff, where we are peppering the books, I hope not in an obnoxious or campy way, with some real people. So that we have Sand has a relationship with John Kennedy, where there's, the Frank Sinatra, the Rat Pack appear in one of the books. And in the current book, John Wayne is in the book. And we're very careful not to make that jokey. It's because if we
play that
camp,
straight,
if we go camp, I think we're dead. So I always say we're slightly tongue in cheek, but we're not camp ever. And
the lines in the Bond film, I think Matt may not know this, but Al certainly does. I teach interrogation, interview and interrogation around the country to law enforcement agencies. And part of that is I talk about the scene in Dr. No, where Dr. No says to James Bond, "You're nothing but a stupid policeman."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I talk about that line and I say, because there are times I want the person I'm interrogating to think I'm nothing but a stupid policeman, because if I can get them to do that and make that assumption, then I own them. And so again, these things have played a part in my life and have stayed with me over the years. And I think it's important that a new generation of readers is going to find and discover this stuff through John Sand as well.
Matt and I had a conversation about that very thing. Do you remember me calling you, Matt, and saying, we got to not lose track of the fact that on a certain level, he's a detective.
Yeah.
He's a detective, and that we can't just send him off on adventure. And there has to be a through line that is, if not a mystery, it's a kind of mission that a detective would be on, that an agent. He's an agent of the government. Like an FBI agent.
I kind of see him as a mix between James Bond and the thinking man spy, Harry Palmer.
Oh, I love Harry Palmer.
Yeah, both of us.
Thinking man's edge in John Sand, again, makes him stand out as his own character. He figures stuff out and he lays traps basically in what he does. He knows this through line.
Well, in the current,
fascinating.
In the current book, which has, if there's not enough action for you in the current book, Live Fast, Die Hard.
I almost got whiplash reading Live Fast, Die Hard.
Check your pulse, because we don't even know what the body count is in that book.
It was several. It was definitely several.
But there
it's
is
not
also
gory.
a moment which is very, to me, Harry Palmer-esque, which is toward the end of the book. I won't give any spoiler here, but where somebody else kills one of the major bad guys, and we do a little thing about, don't worry, when Fleming writes the book, he'll give you credit for that, and it's, so, because if you watch something like the $1 Billion, the $1 Billion Brain, Harry Palmer doesn't accomplish anything in that movie. I mean, he's just overwhelmed by events and bad guys,
circumstances,
and it's a very on a pulp level kind of real. And you know, I love those movies. And incidentally, as you know, they were produced by one of the two James Bond producers.
Yes.
So that also it puts them in a very special wheelhouse, because let's face it, you talk about things that don't hold up. Watch an R. Man Flint movie.
Oh my goodness.
You know,
Watch The Silencers with Dean Martin.
oh, they didn't get. I mean,
They didn't get the books.
It's really
No.
it's really a craze, and we would go to anything that said spy, right? In those years,
Exactly.
but
anything.
very rarely did they get it. They did not get what Connery was up to, what Fleming was up to, what Guy Hamilton as the director was up to.
One of my favorite
Goldfinger's the
directors.
perfect James Bond movie to me.
With
And the interesting
the
thing
body
that we-
count, though, in the John Sand novels, what we have to be sure of here is that we're not talking gore here. We're not talking splatter spy.
No,
We're talking hardcore but PG-13 action that keeps
Right.
going, and we don't dwell on this stuff. It's all part of the action and the ongoing stories. So, and I think that makes the reading easier. It makes it easier to pull yourself through the story.
yeah, we try to. It's funny you mention this, because Matt and I talk about this. What is the balance between making them just like targets in a shooting gallery, and feeling like there is a death happening here, and so we will talk about that. Have we gone too far here in the in the actual description of what the bullet does when it tears through the body and so on? Once in a while, you got to make that point, though. Once in a while, you got to make that point.
I agree. So we are now working on book 3. We have Come Spy With Me, book 1. We have Live Fast, Die Hard. And the third book is going to be, go ahead and reveal the title.
Matthew?
Don't ask me. I never know these things.
That's a very strange title. Don't ask me. We'll try to make it work.
We'll come up with
To
something
live
better.
and spy in Berlin.
To Live and Spy in Berlin. I like it. Hey guys, thanks for being with me today. I really appreciate your time, and really looking forward to seeing how many fans we can gather with the John Sand books. Thanks, gang.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.